everybody. I'm so excited to be back. It's been a few months. Things got crazy around here with spring sports and all sorts of stuff, but I have a bunch of videos that are like half planned or even more, and I'm excited to finally finish them and share them with you all. So this video will be about Uranus transits and what to expect as Uranus transits through a particular house in your chart or makes an aspect to a planet or angle in your chart. And I'm going to look at four different famous examples throughout this video, but I would also like to point out that sometimes the more famous examples can be also a little bit more dramatic, and that you won't necessarily experience them in the same way in your life. So one helpful thing is to look at past Uranus transits that you've experienced, looking at your life and seeing which house Uranus was in which period of time, and seeing like what sorts of things were happening in that area of your life, how it felt in that area of your life, to get a feel for how Uranus shows up for you. Because it is partly also based on how Uranus is placed in your chart natally. Um, and also thinking about like because Uranus takes about 84-ish years to make it around the whole zodiac, to think about, you're only going to have Uranus cross your ascendant or descendant like once in your life. And I mean, like for a period of time anyway. Um, but it's only going to be that one period of time, and thinking about like as Uranus has moved through your chart so far in your life, like what has happened as it has made a major aspect in particular to one of the luminaries, to one of your angles, to your chart ruler. If you're familiar with annual perfections, thinking about Uranus and if it has made any um, aspects to your Lord of the Year during that year. And I mean, that won't happen every year, but when it does, like something significant will probably happen. So it's interesting to look back and think about what happened when that happened for you. Um, and if you aren't familiar with annual reflections, I do have a video on it, which could clear things up for you. I am going to definitely be mentioning perfections and the Lord of the Year during this video because it's really helpful. It's a really helpful way to know which transits are going to be like extra important in any given time, because there's already always, like, if you were to write down every sort of transit you're experiencing on a given day, there's so many different things happening all at once between all the different planets and the angles. And so it's a helpful way to narrow things down and to know like what to really pay attention to. And yeah, and then also like you could also look at past solar returns if you're familiar with those, and when which years Uranus ended up being angular for you, like within a few degrees of the angle. So you could look up to 7 degrees from an angle, I suppose. But even closer would be even more powerful experience of it. Um, and seeing like what those years felt like. Did they feel particularly Uranian? So Uranus. What does Uranus do for us? During Uranus transits, you're going to feel like this need for freedom, independence. There's like this like breaking free sort of quality with Uranus. Uranus can also be like sudden, shocking events, major changes or disruptions, usually unexpected. Like Uranus has a very unexpected quality to it. Um, there's that element of surprise for sure. There can be a lot of like more difficult things that happen with Uranus, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can also be like, breaking out of a situation that isn't good for you, and like finally like having the ability or the drive to do so. Everybody goes through, for example, a Uranus opposition when they're like 38 to 42-ish years. And at that point, so it's like a key part of like, like the midlife crisis or whatever. So it's like a midlife transit where you just feel this sudden need or urge to like somehow move in a different direction in a particular area of your life, or somehow break free. Um, so, that could be expressed in healthy ways or unhealthy ways, obviously. So some people are going to feel more comfortable with Uranian energy, and they're going to feel like this is something that is not majorly disruptive to them because perhaps they live their life in a way that is more Uranian, or perhaps like to some the natal placement of Uranus, for example, like they're just really familiar with that energy and they like work with it and they've like learned how to deal with it throughout their lives. And then other people maybe sort of suppress that part of themselves, and then they get to this Uranus opposition and it's like so counter everything that they normally do and think, and um that it could feel like really disruptive, right? So like I said, look at your past Uranus transits to get an idea of what is coming. let's see, a little bit more about Uranus transits just in general. So I talked about breaking free, independence, like stepping outside of the box, sudden change, shocking events, invention and discovery are sort of related to Uranus. Also, um, like challenging expectations or constraints that you feel. Um, and then also there's like this like sort of electric feel to Uranus, which, was discovered as like electricity was being um, worked with for the first time. And so I feel like there's that quality to it, which can show up in different ways as well. So you may have heard in different astrology circles or online that Uranus is now in Gemini. And this is sort of a brief ingress, and then it will move back into Taurus in November, and then it will station direct in Taurus at 27 degrees Taurus in February, and then move back into Gemini in April of next year, April 2026. And once that happens, it'll be there for like 7 years and ish, because you have to think about how there's like that period of time at the beginning and the period of time at the end where it might go into a sign and then move back out and then move back into it. So like Uranus is approximately in a house for 7 to 8 years, depending on if you count those like brief ingresses, beginning and the end. So it will definitely be in Gemini until 2032, and it'll do the same thing where it will briefly ingress into Cancer, station retrograde, move back into Gemini, and then be firmly back in Cancer in 2033, and will stay there for several years. So approximately 2025 to 2033, or if you want the time period of time where it will only be in Gemini, 2026 to 2032. Um, so yeah, 7 to 8 years, right? And it takes, like I said before, about 84 years to make its way through the entire zodiac. And if you live that long, then you would experience each major Uranus transit at some point in your life. The Uranus opposition I already mentioned is 38 to 42 years old. It's a key transit associated with midlife. And there's also like Uranus squares. 19 to 21, you're going to have a Uranus square, and that's going to be like an age where you really feel that urge to sort of break free and find your independence, right? And then another 20-ish years after your opposition, you'll have the same sort of experience. Okay. And then if you live to be 84 or so, you could have your Uranus return as well. All right. So orbs, generally with outer planets, I like to look at a smaller orb just because I find it more helpful to look at a smaller period of time. And the outer planets move so slowly that if you have this wide orb, it's going to be such a big period of time that it becomes less practically helpful to me to look at in terms of predictive work, or even just trying to understand a part of your life, or trying to narrow down like when in a person's life to pinpoint for certain kinds of energies showing up. So I like 3 degrees for Uranus, but I will look at transits up to 5 degrees, especially if it's like a particularly important transit, like a transit to your chart ruler, a transit to the Lord of the Year, a transit in a perfected house from the ascendant or a luminary, or a transit to an angle, things like that. Like those are like these key transits that are going to be most likely to be felt in a big way. And so for those, I'll allow a wider orb. And you will see some examples in this video of, Uranus being 5 degrees from a conjunction with like the Lord of the Year or something. I can't remember exactly which planets were involved, but it shows up, right? And then other examples where maybe it doesn't involve a Lord of the Year or the chart ruler, anything like especially significant at that given point. And you really start to feel it like within like more like a 2 degree orb or something like that. So I'm going to look at the lives of 4 different famous people from history. I'm going to look at Josephine Baker, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and also um, Frida Kahlo. And then after, like, I planned to look at those 3 only originally, and then I was like, wow, this is like a lot of depressing examples. And that can happen more with like celebrity examples, just that they're more dramatic, like their lives are lived in like this such a big dramatic way that sometimes it can just feel like a lot. But so I like asked my boyfriend, I was like, can you like just name somebody that you think probably had a relatively happy life? And he said Michael Jordan. So I was like, sure, I'll add Michael Jordan. So I like looked through his life and then his Uranus transits and added him. And I'll do him at the end just to end on a more positive note. Because Actually, it was really cool test of astrology that like, he could just throw out this random celebrity and I could look and like the transits are perfect. Like I don't have to like search for somebody where Uranus shows up in a big way for them. Like it does for everybody. It's just different ways, different levels, different like sorts of um manifestations. So, okay, now I am going to get into it with Josephine Baker. All right, so we're going to start with looking at Josephine Baker's life. Josephine Baker was a performer. She first made it big performing as a dancer and then also as a singer. She performed on Broadway. Uh, she eventually she made it big first on the East Coast. She was born in St. Louis, but she made it big on the East Coast and then was given the opportunity to travel to Paris, where she became like a huge star. She spent most of her life living in Paris, and she didn't have to face the same sort of discrimination there that she faced in the US. And she spent a lot of her life trying to find a way to come back to the US and make it big here as well, even though she did love France. Um, and it wasn't until the end of her life that she was finally able to get that kind of recognition here as well. Let's see, what else did she do? She worked as a spy for the French government during World War II. She was also known for this huge family that she had. She adopted children from different parts of the world and tried to create what she called a rainbow tribe. She was very involved in the civil rights movement in the US, even though she didn't live in the US. She came back and spoke with, like gave a speech next to Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights March. I believe she was the only woman to do so. And yeah, so she did a lot of different things in her life. And I also feel like she just has this really Uranian quality to her as well. Like I have this quote. I used this book by Patrick O'Connor, just called Josephine Baker. I use this book for a lot of my information, but then I also looked online too because sometimes this book wouldn't give me the dates and I need the dates. So she had this quote where she said, "I don't care to be told, do this, do that. I've always preferred my freedom," which, is very Uranian. So I thought she'd be a good one to start with. And also because she had so many interesting, like, about faces in her life, in terms of, like, what she was trying to do and what she was focused on, that she's just a really great example. I'm gonna start with a really depressing example from her life. It is very important, though, so we will start with that. When she was 11, there were race riots in St. Louis where she lived, and they were starting near, like, the end of May. Sorry, I'm having trouble bringing up the window that I'm trying to bring up. Okay, there we go. So she was only 11 as she was experiencing this. Well, she turned 11. First, she was 10, and as they were starting, and then, like, once it was, like, getting really bad, she was 11, and the date that this book particularly threw out there was July 2nd of 1917, so we'll look at that in particular. Um, but when she was, let's see, so we have Uranus here. Like I just did like a mid-May date just to show you that Uranus in her sixth house was trine her Mars, right? And it was stationing retrograde. So if we go forward a week, then there we go. Then, you can see Uranus is moving forward, and then we move forward another week and it's stationing. And then by the beginning of June, when she's having her birthday, Uranus is then moving retrograde. So when a planet stations, it becomes like super powerful. It's like just like really emphasized in that moment. And so it was stationing here, trine her Mars. And while the trine is a relatively positive aspect, Uranus and Mars can be difficult planets to work with, especially together. And this was sort of the moment that set her moving forward on her path in the way that it did. And it was a violent experience, and it set her out on this quest for like freedom. And I even have this quote here where she says, let's see. Where is it? She says, East St. Louis was a most horrible place. Yes, worse than the Deep South. I was a little girl, and all I remember is people. They ran across the bridge from East St. Louis to escape the rednecks, the whites killing and beating them. I never forget my people screaming, pushing to get to the bridge. A friend of my father's face shot off, a pregnant woman cut open. I see them running to get to the bridge. I've been running ever since. And that like running ever since was the part that like really to me sort of screams Uranus with Mars, right? So I wanted to show that that station was happening there, emphasizing her natal Mars. And because she has this huge stellium here in Gemini, like the whole thing is getting emphasized. And then after her birthday, as all of this is like really still like getting going, she enters a 12th house perfection year, a solar year, so that the sun becomes super important. And the sun throughout this is transiting her entire Gemini stellium, just like making it that much more important. And additionally, when you look at the date brought up as particularly important during this race riot experience for Josephine Baker, we have July 2nd, 1917, and you have Mars, which had already been activated by that Uranus station and is continuing to be activated by that trine there. Mars is right on top of her sun. And the sun being the Lord of the year, you're going to really feel that. So it's almost like this Uranus like kicked that Mars into like extra importance with that station there. And then Mars is then hitting the Lord of the Year. And it's just like, there's like that fear for her life. And then also that like impetus to just like run and run as fast as you can and try to get away from there. And that like set forward her whole life. Like it set everything in action, really, in a way. And she was only 11. So, like, this was, I thought, like the most important place to start from. Um, and you also have, like, as this is happening, you have the transiting sun, because you're going to look at both when you're looking at the Lord of the Year and like what's going on with it. You're going to look at not only aspects to that planet, but also aspects that transiting planet is making to other places in your chart. And throughout this whole experience, you have the sun, transiting sun, passing over her Venus and Neptune conjunction in the 11th house, which to me is a lot to do with her like role as a performer and like this like image of beauty and elegance and sort of like mystery a little bit, that became like a major part of her identity and image throughout her life. Okay. But I just wanted to show how that Uranus station to me like plays a big role in kicking off this whole like progression of events, which does end up circling around this Lord of the Year, the sun. All right, next I just want to look at the effect of Uranus moving into a house. So it's a little bit hard with Josephine Baker to get like exact dates for a lot of things that happened to her, which is frustrating when you're doing astrology. Some key things, like even like her marriage, like I don't know the date. So um, when she was 13, she got married. And I know that happened in 1919, and her birthday is in June. So in the second half of 1919, she got married. And it did not last long, as you might expect when you're 13 years old. But this is showing how right after her birthday, Uranus was in her seventh house, hadn't been there long, and it was actually stationing there. So as Uranus moves into and then stations in her seventh house for the first time, she gets married for the first time. And then it didn't last, like I said. And then 2 years later, I don't know the exact date, but I know it was September of 2021. So just do halfway through. 2021, that's fine. 1921. She got married for a second time. So she was only 15 and she got married for the second time. And you can see here in September of 1921 that Uranus was very close to conjunct her descendant, which is all about the partner in marriage. So um, that's all I really wanted to show there is just, Uranus enters her seventh house, and before it's even reached halfway through the sign, she's already been married twice, and she will be divorced twice. She ended up getting married 4 times, and then she had a fifth partner that some sources say she did like an informal sort of marriage ceremony to near the end of her life. But that is a little hard to get information on. All right, so the next example, I only know the month again, so it's August 1922, so I just did halfway through the month, so we could look at it that way. This is when she became part of the Shuffle Along production, which is really where she started to make herself known. and to make a name for herself. And she actually had to audition a couple times to get in, and there was still some skepticism about her. Like, she kind of moved differently, and there was like something a little like quirky about her, and that ended up being something that people really loved about her. And she seemed so like genuine and carefree, and she didn't try to blend in with the crowd, which, as like a part of a chorus of girls, or part of like this like big set of dancers at first, wasn't maybe what they were looking for necessarily, but ended up being something that really helped her to shine in productions, and contributed to her fame. So this is approximately when she first became part of Shuffle Along. And you can see Uranus here is in this square to her sun. And I think that in terms of like, an impetus to really like make herself known and to find her way to like shine and follow her like purpose and her calling and all of that, that is a great manifestation of that. Then also wanted to point out that she was 16 here. It was a fifth house perfection year, and Saturn was the Lord of the year, because she had Capricorn here. So Uranus was also applying to a conjunction with her natal Saturn. And at the same time, as far as I can tell from the research that I did, it's a little bit unclear. But it seems to me that what happened was she got married the year before, and then she got this opportunity to move to Boston and be part of Shuffle Along, and that she kind of just left her husband and then didn't look back. And so to me, that also is being shown here with this Uranus approaching Saturn in her transit chart here. All right, so she continues to perform with various productions in different cities. She tours around, particularly the East Coast of the country, and she really starts to make a name for herself, and she makes all different kinds of connections, and she eventually is offered the opportunity to move to Paris to perform there. And as that's happening, well, this is like the date, I found the date when she actually moved to Paris, and Uranus is trying her natal Mars here, when she moved to Paris. And she ended up spending the majority of her life living in France. And if you remember from like the first example we looked at during those race riots, when that Mars was being activated in such a big way, and she had that quote about how she wanted to keep running, and she never stopped running after that experience. And to me, the square from between Uranus and her natal Mars here, as she decides to leave the country and gets that first opportunity to do so, is really just perfect. It was also a Mars um, year. Mars was the Lord of the year. It was an eighth house perfection year because she was 19. Um, and not only is Uranus in that square with her natal Mars, but there's also like as she's preparing to move, and like she accepts the opportunity and then is getting ready to move and so on, you have Mars, like transiting Mars, moving through her first house of her identity and her image. And um, it's in a pretty close opposition to transiting Uranus when she does move. So Mars is being activated in a big way here. And the eighth house, it being an eighth house perfection year is also interesting because I'm going to make a different video about this, but Josephine Baker is really interesting when you look at her in terms of like locational astrology, and her relocated chart in France has Scorpio rising, and her whole Gemini stellium falls in the eighth house. And there were a lot of like major eighth house topics like related to like debt and things like that that came up for her in France, and became like a theme for her, and especially in the second part of her life. So I just thought that was interesting that as she moves to France, she's also in an eighth house perfection year. So that is all I want to say about that one. All right, so next I'm going to look at a 2-year window of time in which she was doing her world tour. I don't have exact dates, but she was touring all around Europe and other places as well. And she was largely met with very positive reactions, and she really was able to like expand her reputation and gain more fans and more of a following, I guess you could say. And yet she also was first like really encountering like the rise of fascism in Europe as well, and she did have some interesting experiences related to that. And so as she's starting this world tour, you have Uranus applying to a square with her natal Uranus. And like I said, between like 19 to 21 or so, in her case, it looks like she was 22. Uranus squares your natal Uranus, and there's like this need to like break free, usually, and like sort of, figure out who you are. And she's literally like breaking across boundaries, like doing this world tour um, during this period of time. And then as we move forward, 1 year first, and then another year, Uranus is applying to a sextile during that tour with her sun, and then does eventually become exactly sextile her sun. And then also at the end of the tour, you have Uranus in a trine with her north node. So there's like this sense of her following her calling, both with the sun and the node involved here, in positive aspects with Uranus. And this just being like a really big forward movement for her career during this time. Okay, so in December 1934, Josephine Baker premiered in her first opera as a lead role, and it was like huge for her career, and it was a major departure from things she had done previously. It really gave her like a new level of respectability in public, and I just wanted to point out this Uranus opposition to her moon, and also the fact that her moon rules her Venus and Neptune combination here at this conjunction in the 11th house. That to me is such a big part of her as a performer. And I have a couple quotes here that I think also just sort of show like what was going on with this experience for her. Like she had a quote about the um, the role itself and the music in it, and she said that the music is delicious, it's sentimental, soft, everything springs from the melodies, all the delicacy and harmonies flow and sway. Sounds very lunar to me. And then also in talking about like the change in her reputation that came from this. It says, as for Josephine, reviewers and critics from every journal and paper in Paris were enthusiastic about her change of persona. One composer wrote, she's adorable. Her singing, acting, and dancing are all in pure Offenbach style. Each of her performances is a miracle of fine grace and tact. This is her debut in operetta. It is dazzling. There's simply no one else today who possesses such radiant spontaneity and unique charm. And then it says La Creole was Josephine's greatest artistic triumph in Paris in the 1930s. With it, she escaped from the quote savage label completely, and became a part of the boulevard tradition that was not only legitimate but attracted an audience who would have been ill at ease with her risque nature, with the risque nature of much of the material that she had done previously, because she had been, like dancing topless and doing different sorts of dances that were loved by the public, but definitely were seen as more risque. And, there was also this sense with some of her earlier productions that she was a part of where, in order to be like a famous Black performer, you almost had to cater to that discrimination that was there, that like, sort of play up the otherness. Like when I was reading about some of the first performances that she was in, they would use blackface, and even the Black performers would add blackface because then that way, they would blend in with the white performers, and it was a messed up time. And so this experience for her was like her first attempt to be, and first like real change in like what she was presenting to the public, and her ability to like really shine in this role that was just like purely about her talent and her grace and her like um you know amazing ability to shine on stage, that this is what came through here as Uranus was opposite her moon. All right, so I just realized that Solar Fire had the wrong birth time. At least my Solar Fire did. I mean, it's only B rated to begin with, but if you look on like AstroSeek, then you would see an 11 a.m. birth time versus my Solar Fire had 11:30. And I was wondering a couple times when I was looking at the transits, I was like, I really thought that it was a more clear transit to the angles here. And I just kind of left it out because I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. And I should have double checked, but Mercury stationing retrograde. And yeah, so I'm going to continue with the time that I feel is actually the right one, the 11:30, because there are a few points that I didn't mention earlier where um, the transit to the angle seemed so perfect, and then I couldn't see it, and I was like, what was I thinking? Like when she moved to Paris, Uranus was exactly trying her IC, and so like that change in home was like so spot on for that moment. And as you're about to see, this is what made me notice it. There's some transits from Uranus to her midheaven, which with the 11:30 birth time is in her 10th house, and with the 11 a.m. birth time, it's in her ninth house. And yeah, I feel like the transits line up a lot better with the 11:30 birth time. So I'm going to continue with that. And everything that I've gone over so far, um, should still be pretty accurate. There was one time where there was a transit to her descendant, um, but that was one of the marriages where I didn't have the exact date anyway, I believe. Let me just check really quick, make sure. Well, I will find it and then I will make sure that it still works with this birth time, but I'm sure that it does because the bulk of that was about just the fact that as Uranus moved into her seventh house, which since I use whole signs, is Uranus ingressing into a sign, and a half an hour difference in the birth time would not affect when it entered that house because it's still entering the sign that day, right? So that wouldn't be affected. And whatever the one was where it was near her descendant, I know that it worked when I did all my research, I was using the right time. And then I just opened it up on SolarFire because I use something different on my phone. And so I opened up on SolarFire on my computer to record this. And there was a couple times where I was like, man, this isn't lining up quite the way I thought it would. Like there was a couple times where I was like, I thought it was better than this. I had the time wrong. Okay. So we're going to continue with the right time. So you might notice in the recording now, the ascendant is at 2 degrees instead of, I think it was at 8 before. And then the midheaven is now in the late degrees of Taurus in the ninth house instead of the early degrees of Gemini in the 10th house. It shouldn't affect anything except for that one transit to the descendant that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go back and look at it and then comment on it if it needs to be commented on. Okay. So anyway, this is showing when she first flew a plane for the first time, and then she ended up getting her pilot's license later that year. But I just love that Uranus is exactly trying her ascendant, with the right ascendant, hopefully, um, as she is literally like breaking free from gravity, right, in a sense. And in the ninth house too, that just feels so much like flying Uranus in the ninth. That feels great to me. So I wanted to point that out. But then also there's a lot of things involving international politics in other countries that show up as Uranus is in her ninth house. So I'm going to walk through a couple of those really quickly. So now I gotta find my place here again. So she gets married again to Jean Leon, October 30th, 1937. That up. And the big thing I wanted to point out here is that Uranus is applying to a square with her nodes. So really like bringing up these topics of like where is she going from, where is she coming from, and also it is no, I'm just gonna leave it there for now. So she gets married, but then like a major part of this, like an important thing I want to mention, because she's only married to him for a few years. And then as the Germans are invading Russia, Russia, oh my God. The Germans are invading France, where she lives, and she has to relocate to another part of France. And her husband moves to South America. Um, and she like ends up helping his because he was Jewish. She ends up helping his family to get papers and things so that they can flee as well. Um, and there's just so many different topics that come up related to international things as Uranus is in her ninth house. But also, when she marries him at this moment here, she becomes a French citizen. So her citizenship changing to me is a great example of Uranus transiting her ninth house. So that's one thing. She also starts working as a spy. Um, and I'm going to bring up there was like one date where she was smuggling intelligence across the border into Spain. I don't know the exact date, I just know the month. So it's November of 1940. We'll just do halfway through. And so Uranus is starting to approach her midheaven, right? And then later, January 1941, her and the security chief are sent to Casablanca, Morocco to continue work as a spy. Just do halfway through January again. And so at some point in that period of time, Uranus was stationing somewhat near her midheaven. I can go back a few months and see when it happened. Okay, so in August 1940 at station. Look, it's stationed pretty close too to her midheaven. So again, this just really makes me feel like this is the right birth time, like because there's just so much change going on in terms of like her major role that she has in the world, and going from being like performing as like her life and like what she's like driven to do, to as she starts working as a spy, her performances almost become like a cover for her. Like she's able to um pass along information and get across security checks and borders and be able to be undisturbed because she's using her performing as like her reason for being there and her like excuse, so to speak. So it's really a dramatic shift in like what her primary role is as Uranus is stationing near her midheaven. So let's see. In Morocco, she ends up having it's sort of unclear. Like if you look at different sources, like some say she has like a miscarriage or something, and then it like leads to sepsis and she ends up hospitalized, or other sources don't mention the miscarriage, but they just talk about how she has something going on with like intestinally or something. Anyway, there's surgeries and there's sepsis and she almost dies and she's in the hospital for 18 months. That part is pretty clear. So June of 1941 she's first hospitalized, and Uranus again is heading back towards her midheaven. And then as she's being hospitalized, Uranus is still in her ninth house, but then it moves into her 10th house in August of 1941, retrogrades back over the midheaven in late 1941, and then again April 1942, and in March 1943, she's finally discharged from the hospital. So let's look at that. Oops. I guess I do need to pick a date. We'll say March 15th, 1943. Okay, so Uranus is finally in her 10th house as she's able to like go back out into the world, and she starts performing again. She actually starts performing for the troops throughout Northern Africa, up to like Jerusalem even. And in May 19, oh, and also around this time, Uranus stations conjunct her Mercury as she's, you know, sort of revitalizing this role of her like performing to the troops now. So in May 1944, she's made a second lieutenant officer in the Women's Auxiliary of the French Air Force. We'll look at that one real quick. Oops. So we have Uranus. It's outside of the 3-degree orb that I like to use, but it's still within the 5-degree orb and it's approaching her sun here. Um, and just that like recognition of the sun in the 10th, and then here she is getting this recognition in this role, this important role. And like after this point, she wears that uniform like in all of her public appearances. Like it's clearly like really important to her and like really changes her perception of herself, is being given this role as second lieutenant officer. And so I just wanted to point that out. See, in 1944, she would have been 38. So it's a third house perfection year ruled by Mars. I just wanted to see if anything was going on with the um, Lord of the Year here. Not really seeing that much. I mean, you have Mars in the 11th house and she's being recognized and being like brought in as like part of this organization. So like there's that, but and tying it in with Uranus, I'm not seeing as much. And then you also have Saturn conjunct her natal Mars, and there's just like that like honor and reputation aspect that comes along with this role that she takes on. And also, Mars in the 10th and being like part of the military, that makes sense too to me. So um, yeah. Okay, but I think I covered the Uranus parts of this. All right, I went back and I looked, and the different birth time, what that changes is that Uranus was conjunct her descendant when she got married the first time, not the second time. So it still works. It totally works. And maybe even works better that the first time she gets married is when Uranus is conjunct her descendant. But I knew it worked when I looked it up. And then when I was doing it, I was like, oh, I guess I didn't write this down right. But now I understand. So yay, Mercury. Okay, so this is showing the next event I wanted to show was when she returns back to Paris after the war, and she's like viewed as a hero by the Parisian public. Um, she's really like never more loved than she is in this moment, really to an extent, especially in France. So this is October. I just picked the 15th, 1944. And look, Uranus is conjunct her sun in the 10th house. So that's pretty straightforward. It's also, if you were to like think like, okay, well, why this exact moment? Like Uranus will be essentially conjunct her sun for a wider period of time. Yes, but it's also a Mars perfection year. Um, and at this moment, transiting Mars is also sextile her ascendant and trine her descendant. And so things are really just going well for her in terms of her like image and how she's being received by other people and her reputation in general. All right, so I also just wanted to mention before I move on that at this moment, it was also a particularly significant moment because Uranus was actually stationing right on her sun. All right, so the next thing I wanted to look at is when she gets married. Fourth time to Joe Bouillon and Bouillon, am I going with? And that was her longest marriage. They were married for 14 years. And it was with him that she adopts her large family of children. And it's also while married to him that she purchases the chateau that she had been renting in southern France. And these all end up being like key parts of like how the rest of her life plays out. So June 1947, they got married. Just go with June 15th, 1947. Okay, so we have Uranus up here, conjunct her Pluto and her Mars. And I just want to point out that Mars is also the ruler of her eighth house, which has to do with shared finances. So getting married is like a important one for that. But then also debt and her purchasing the chateau after getting married to her fourth husband was also part of her eventual like she became like overrun by debt and ended up being kicked out of the chateau down the road, and then she was evicted, and then she had to rely on a friend to find her housing. And um, so eighth house topics really big in this part of her life and moving forward in her life. And her marriage coincides with Uranus applying to conjunction to Mars, the ruler of her eighth house. So I wanted to point that out. Um, and yeah, I think I'll leave that there for now. Right, so now we're going to look at her Uranus opposition. So May 20th, 1951, you can see there's a really close opposition to her natal Uranus. So Uranus is in her 11th house. It's applying to conjunction with her Venus and Neptune, which again are very, very tied in with her as a performer. And her like image is this like icon of beauty and grace and talent and all of that. And opposing her Uranus in the fifth house, which also ties in those topics of performing and pleasure and all of those things. So during this time, there's a lot that happens in 1951 in general, and like the Uranus opposition is like a wider window of time. But in this particular date, this is when the NAACP named her the Woman of the Year, and they had Josephine Baker Day in Harlem, and this is the exact date for that. So right as she's having this Uranus opposition, and Uranus is applying to conjunction with her Venus and Neptune, she gets this like major recognition in the U.S. At the same time, there's a lot of tension and drama happening as she's trying to perform in the US during 1951. She's giving concerts in Miami, Chicago, like different places, and as she's going, she's saying like, I will not perform for a segregated audience. And it's causing like, it's like really stirring things up. And she starts getting death threats from the KKK. Um, so all of this is happening this year as she's having this Uranus opposition and as Uranus is applying to conjunction with her natal Venus and Neptune. All right, so October 16th, 1951 was a really important day in Josephine Baker's timeline because she accused this New York nightclub of like de facto segregation, and she stormed out. Her then like acquaintance Grace Kelly also stormed out. They became good friends after that, which ended up being really important later on in Josephine Baker's life. But they stormed out, and she turns to this reporter that she felt like she was friendly with, that who would like support her publicly in this whole situation. And instead, he basically freaks out on her. He calls her a communist, accuses her of communist sympathies anyway, at a time when that was like, a really big deal. And by the following year, she has her work visa actually revoked. She can't even return to the US for years after that. Um, so it sort of sets this whole chain of events in action. Um, and this is the chart for that day. And you'll notice that Uranus is trining her Saturn in the seventh house, but then also it's a 10th house perfection year. And so the Lord of the year is Mercury, and also like anything going on in the 10th house or two planets in the 10th house, transits to them is going to be extra important. And you can see that this day, Mercury, the Lord of the year, was precisely trining her Mars in the 10th house, and like Mercury being like this reporter who is also activating this like Martian energy related to like her in her public reputation, and being like seriously damaged by this reporter in this time. And it is a trine, sure, but like it's still like activating that energy. And so I just wanted to point out those two different trines going on when this is happening. Um, And I don't know exactly when her work visa was revoked, but I know it was in 1952. And I just wanted to show you here at the end of March 1952, Uranus stations conjunct her Venus and Neptune in her 11th house. It's also, again, not quite all the way back to the Uranus opposition, but close, like definitely with an orb. So, um, that was important at that time as well. And then we have a couple-year period during which she was adopting her many children. She adopted 12 children overall between 1953 to 1955. And during that period of time, here we have, I don't know the exact dates, but here we have October 1953, and you have Uranus squaring the moon in her second, trining the IC. I mean, there's a lot going on here. And I also feel like it's really relevant to point out that in 1953, the nodes entered her fifth house. So the North Node enters her fifth house, and she starts trying to build this family and adopt all of these children. And then we can move forward a couple of years, and we can see the nodes still there, Uranus still in this um, angle, this aspect to the moon, and then also to the IC. All right, so the 60s were basically summarized by her having, she was having some like issues raising so many teenagers at once, as you could imagine. And there were also, so, she in the 60s, Uranus moves into her first house. So it's opposing her seventh house, and she starts having some difficulties in her close personal relationships. But then also, she started having a lot of health issues, and that kind of prevented her from being able to tour and perform. And then that also led to mounting debts. And she did have 12 kids, and she lived in a chateau. And she had also given away so much of her money to help people at the end of the war, too, that she she really didn't have a lot. Like, she sold all her jewelry and all this, and so um, the debt starts to mount up. She's having all these health issues. She's having difficulties raising 12 teenagers at once. And this ties in with Uranus. All this ties in with Uranus being in her first house. After 1961. And I just want to point out that in the first parts of 1961, Uranus was still in her 12th, and it was squaring her midheaven, and she received two of France's highest military honors, the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor, at a ceremony. And during that ceremony, details of her espionage work were also like brought to light. So that seemed like a pretty cool Uranus in the 12th transiting, squaring her midheaven, and like this like very 12th house sort of work she had been doing is coming to light in that time. So she also officially divorced her fourth husband during this time in 1961. And then Uranus moves into the first house, and um, and I'm not sure exactly when she got divorced, so that could have been already when Uranus was in the first, but either way, it would have been like very close, within orb of her ascendant, opposing her descendant as she is getting this divorce. Then next, we'll look at the Civil Rights March, August 28th, 1963. So we have a 10th house perfection year ruled by Mercury. Mercury is also her chart ruler since she's Virgo rising. And as she is participating in this Civil Rights March and being like so prominently recognized that she's like speaking next to Martin Luther King Jr., Uranus is squaring her Mercury there. So very big transit at this time. So then, after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, his wife, Coretta Scott King, she actually approached Josephine Baker and asked her to sort of like take over as like the face of the civil rights movement. And I don't know the exact date, but I know it was April 1968. So as this was happening, Uranus was moving retrograde and it was applying to a square with the Mars in Josephine Baker's 10th house. And her reason for turning Coretta Scott King down was that she was afraid for her children. That like basically that there was like fear associated with like taking this role on. Obviously, like Martin Luther King had just been assassinated for being in that prominent position. And she was afraid to take that on because she had all these children that depended on her. But then it's like activating that natal Mars. And like we've seen in past transits, that Mars getting activated during the race rise when she was a child in this way of her being afraid for her life in the United States and like within that like um unjust system and with facing all that discrimination, that hatred and that violence. So it's being activated again here by Uranus in her first. So I just wanted to point that out. Right. So this chart shows the approximate day that she was evicted from her home. It was a fourth house perfection year. So themes of the home being extra important this year, and then also Mars being there is being difficult, especially its opposition to her chart ruler, natal Mercury in the 10th house. But I wanted to look at Uranus, which is in her first house, with the Lord of the Year, Jupiter, as well as the South Node and Pluto. So like powerful things going on. But then also Uranus was stationing direct there at 2952 Virgo. So it had been in her second house. And there's like a lead up to her being evicted. Like, she had mounting debts and she couldn't figure out how to take care of them. And so Uranus had been in her second house of personal finances, opposite her eighth house of debt. And you also have Chiron transiting there in her eighth house. And then it stationed retrograde. It moved back into her first house, and now it stations direct, and it's going to start moving back into her second house as she's being evicted because of her financial situation. And the that year, she had to rely on her friends for financial help. She had to rely on Grace Kelly, who is now Princess Grace, who gave her a villa to live in Monaco. And if I change the date here, I don't know exactly when that happened, but it was later that year. So we'll just go with like September or something like that, 1969. Um, yeah, so you have Uranus is now definitely in her second house, and the Lord of the Year, Jupiter, also there in her second house of finances. So, like, these are like major things that are changing at this time. But then also, it's all activating this natal mutual reception between her moon in the second of personal finances and her Venus in the 11th house of friends. And that ended up being very intertwined for her this year. And in fact, you have Uranus and Jupiter. I'm not sure exactly when she was offered this villa by Princess Grace, but they're both squaring that Venus and Neptune conjunction. And then Neptune's also coming into play because it's like conjunct her IC, and there's definitely confusion about where she's going to live this year and all of that. So just wanted to point out a bunch of different things that were going on this year, which even though I don't know the exact dates, are very helpful to look at. I do know that she was evicted very close to that date that I showed the chart for because it said just days after her birthday. So that was 4 days after her birthday. So it could be off by a day or two, but it feels like pretty accurate to look at that chart. This is the last transit I want to look at for Josephine Baker for Uranus transit. So This was June 5th, 1973. She performed at Carnegie Hall in New York, and it was the first time that she got this like really positive reaction in the US that she had wanted. Like she wept on stage. Like it was this like huge moment for her. She finally got the reception in the United States that she'd been waiting her whole life to get. And this was also the year, I don't know the date, but this is also the year that she possibly informally married her last partner that she was with for the last couple of years of her life, Robert Brady. So overall, a very positive year for her. And this event was a very positive event for her. And we have Uranus here in the second house, which, can also be about like your self-esteem and your self-worth and your self-valuing. And it is in this trine with her natal Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars. And this was a Mars perfection year. So that Mars activation there is extra important. And so I just wanted to point out how Uranus transits can also be related to more positive events. And you also have like this Venus had just transited over her natal Mars as well. And then you also have like Jupiter over here on her south node and her Chiron in the sixth. And yeah, there's a lot of positive things going on. I mean, you have the transiting node like right on her natal Uranus in the fifth. So there was a lot going on as she was giving this performance, but this is one of the more positive ones I could show for her. So I wanted to end on that note, and then I will move on to the next person. So now we're going to look at Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. I have three more people I wanted to look at, so I'm going to try to just like fly through them so that this doesn't end up being like a 4 or 5 hour video. So this is looking at around the time that her parents separated. I don't know an exact date. I know it was probably the second half of 1936 from what I can tell. And you have Uranus in her seventh house approaching her natal Chiron. And if you move forward at some point in the second half of 1939, as far as I can tell, is when her parents' divorce was official. And so at some point during that time, while between her parents separating and divorcing, Uranus crossed over her Chiron, her North Node on her descendant and her descendant. So that all feels very relevant. Make sure I'm not missing anything else I wanted to point out there. Nope, that looks good. Okay, so I also just wanted to point out that Uranus entered her ninth house, and then while Uranus was still there in her ninth house, and she was having a ninth house perfection year, she actually moved to France to study French intensively in university. So university, foreign language, foreign culture, foreign travel, like all those things coming up. Not only while Uranus was in her ninth house, but when it was also being activated by this ninth house perfection year. And this shows the day that her husband was elected to be president, and you can see Uranus is approaching her midheaven. So like these like sudden radical changes in her place in the world and her, like how she's being viewed and her reputation, all of that happening as she becomes first lady. Okay, so this is the date of the release of a documentary that was made after she allowed the media to come in and tour the White House after she had been working on it. And this documentary ended up winning an Emmy. It was viewed in over 100 countries. This year, she also became Times Woman of the Year. So, like a lot, like this was a really big thing for her public image and her reputation. And Uranus is exactly conjunct her midheaven only days after the release of this documentary. All right, so this shows when her husband was assassinated, and you can see that Uranus is applying to a conjunction with her natal Mars in the 11th house, and she's in an 11th house perfection year. Also, Pluto is exactly conjunct that Mars, so it's being activated by both Pluto and Uranus, which is definitely a intense combination. And then also that Uranus is in this like pretty exact square with her Jupiter in the eighth house, which can be about loss and grief. And if you watch my annual perfections video, which was entirely focused on her life, you'll see that that Jupiter in the eighth does get activated a lot for her in that way, especially that square there between the Jupiter in the eighth and the Mars in the 11th throughout her life. So this is when her husband was murdered, and let's see if I have anything else I really want to look at. If I move it forward a year, you can see that when the name of the gunman was released, that Uranus was exactly conjunct her Mars. And then her brother-in-law was also murdered. Should I have the date right? June 6th, 1968. Yes. So when her brother-in-law, who she had also like turned to him for support after her husband was murdered, and they had been close, and he had been really helpful to her and like a good support system for her. And you can see also that the ruler of her third, where you would find siblings and like extended family and all of that, is ruled by and represented by Saturn in her chart. And when he was assassinated, Uranus was in this square with her natal Saturn. So I just wanted to point that out because I feel like, and then you also have like the Saturn, like the transiting Saturn is trine her natal Saturn, and that Saturn's just being activated in multiple ways at this point. So after her brother-in-law is murdered, she becomes like she gets this idea that she wants to basically retreat. I have a quote here. Um, she starts like fearing for her life, for her the lives of her children, and she says, "If they're killing Kennedys, then my children are targets. I want to get out of this country." And later that year, October 20th, 1968, she marries a longtime friend, Aristotle Onassis, who is Greek, and she's able to basically accomplish this goal of leaving the country. And this is all happening as Uranus is moving into her 12th house, which can be about like exile and retreat and you know all of that. So I just thought that that was pretty interesting as well. Sometimes just like the shift from one house to another can be you can really feel the difference. And while Uranus is still in her 12th house, her husband, her second husband, also dies. And it isn't until September 1975, as Uranus is moving into her first house, that she decides to take a job as an editor and move back to the United States. And she actually worked as an editor for the rest of her life. Like this became like a huge part of her identity. She was still pretty young when she took this job, so like a major part of her life was her work as an editor. And so as Uranus is moving into her first house, she has this radical shift in like her view of herself and her identity and her image. And that's the last thing I'm going to look at for her. I also just wanted to point out this event, which is when she received her teaching certification. And she did teach throughout the majority of her life. She taught art. And as this was happening, Uranus was in like an exact square to her natal Uranus in the sixth. And the sixth house can also be about work. And this was, creating a change there. But then also, it was a 10th house perfection year, so that theme of work is coming up again. And then also she has like the node directly on her, the transiting north node directly on her midheaven. And um, yeah. So, and I like the ninth house for teaching too. So that all makes sense to me. Now, this is the day that she married Diego Rivera, and there's like a lot going on. You have the all involving Uranus. You have the Uranus square her natal Uranus, but then you also have Uranus squaring, squaring Mars, it's squaring her natal Neptune and Sun in the 12th. And yeah, so there's just like Uranus is like activating so much, like that entire, like all of those oppositions between her 12th and her sixth house are being activated as she is experiencing this Uranus square natal Uranus, which is a time of, like I said, breaking free, rebellion, all of that. And her parents, especially her mom, did not approve this marriage. And I don't know exactly when in June it happened, but in June 1930, she was forced to have an abortion because of medical reasons. Like they didn't think, with all of the damage that had been done from her accident and all of the um, physical problems that she had, that she would be able to carry the baby. So they forced her to have an abortion. It was really traumatic for her, and it comes through in her art a lot. But also, there's still that square happening there between, it's like activating all of those planets still, like that Sun and Mars opposition and all of that. It's all still being activated by the square from Uranus. And still continuing with that Uranus square, all of those planets in her chart, Uranus stationed and then moved retrograde and now is applying to an exact Uranus square again to her natal Uranus, as well as other planets involved. And at this time, with Uranus in her ninth house, they actually moved to the United States. Her and her husband moved to another country. So another great example of Uranus in the ninth, but also the transiting North Node has entered the ninth too. So there's just like big changes in that area is what you would expect. And then as Uranus is finally starting to make it into the later degrees of Aries, it is squaring her nodes in the 12th and the 6th house. And this is when, so she had actually gotten pregnant again. And then she had a different doctor because she's in the United States and she was talking to a different doctor. And they convinced her that she could actually try to go ahead with the pregnancy. And she, I think, really, got her heart set on that and then had a miscarriage. And so this is the chart for when she has a miscarriage after deciding she was going to keep the baby and try to do it, even though it might be difficult with her health and so on. So I just wanted to point this out, but then also, it was a solar perfection year as well. And, she's having her solar return right around the same time. And then that also means, of course, that it's activating that sun opposite Mars that she has natally. It's being activated again at this time. So by the end of 1933, she really wants to move back to the United States. Her husband wants to stay. They've been fighting about it. And then he like paints the face of Lenin into one of his works that he was commissioned to do. And then he gets in trouble and he gets let go from the commission. So then because of that, in December 1933, they're actually able to move back to Mexico, which is what Frida wanted in the first place. And this is happening as Uranus is once again squaring her nodes. And again, it's another major ninth house sort of, Uranus in the ninth house sort of transit moving back from one country to another. They do it twice while Uranus is in her ninth house. And I haven't really been showing transits to asteroids very much in this, but the asteroid Juno I like to use in terms of like commitment and trust and all of those sorts of themes and how they show up for a person. And as Uranus is opposite her natal Juno, this whole year, 1935, um, she was fighting a lot with Diego Rivera and found out that he had been having an affair with her sister. She decides she's going to move out. She ends up like taking a trip with friends to go to the United States for a little while. Then she comes back. She decides that she'll live with him again, but she knows he's going to keep having affairs. And basically, she decides from that point on forward that she's also going to be having affairs. And so it sort of like creates this new dynamic for them in their marriage, where as long as he has ended the relationship with her sister, then they're going to have this new way moving forward of relating to each other. And this is all happening as Uranus is opposite her Juno. Also worth noting that she's starting to have all these exhibits and like really being able to show her work and grow her reputation as Uranus is entering her 10th house. And while it is there, that becomes like a major theme for her. So this is showing summer of 1939, she moved out from her home with Diego Rivera. She moved out of her husband's home and then moved back in with her parents. And then a few months after this, they got an official divorce. One source said that he requested the divorce because she had been drinking too much, and then other sources were unclear. So I'm not exactly sure what happened there. But as this is happening, Uranus is squaring her ascendant and descendant axis. And I don't know exactly when she moved out. I just know summer, so I just picked a date. But it's on her midheaven and opposite her IC, which is all like going to be tied in with like changes in the home, changes in relationships, and then we'll look at the date when they got the official divorce. And this is the day that they actually got the official divorce, and it's very similar to in terms of Uranus transits, like it's still, conjunct the midheaven opposite the IC, squaring the ascendant descendant axis. But what you'll notice here is that she's in a Mars perfection year, and as the divorce is finalized, Mars is applying to an exact conjunction with her descendant in her 7th house. So in September 1940, as Uranus is stationing retrograde, conjunct her midheaven, so that once it's retrograde, it will be applying to her midheaven. She actually travels back to the US, and while she's there, she reconnects with Diego Rivera. And they end up getting married again. So let's look at that date. So this is the day that they remarried, only a few months after they reconnected again. And you can see that Uranus is exactly conjunct the midheaven, exactly and the opposite the IC, and exactly squaring the ascendant descendant axis. So this was the day of a big international surrealism exhibition that she was part of that like really helped her to grow her reputation as an artist and like really helped her in that regard. And Uranus is applying to a conjunction with the midheaven again. And then in 1942, you can see that in May 1942, Uranus enters her 11th house, which can have to do with like groups and organizations. And I'm not sure on the exact date, but in 1942, she becomes one of the founding 25 artists and intellectuals in the Seminaria de Cultura Mexicana, which ended up being an important role that she had and something that she was known for. And this happened as Uranus is entering her 11th house of groups and organizations. And then in June of 1946, she traveled back to the US for another major spinal surgery, but it didn't actually do what they wanted it to do. It wasn't a success. And it sort of led to like basically this like major downward momentum with her health for the rest of her life. And during this time, Uranus was, well, she was in a third house perfection year, first of all, and you have Chiron here in the third house. And this Chiron is also in this trine with transiting Uranus as well as her natal Chiron. And then Chiron can be about that, like, those like wounds that you can't heal. So I thought that that was really a striking transit there. And then this was when she won an award for, let's see the exact title. She won the National Prize of Arts and Sciences from the Ministry of Public Education. And this was happening as Uranus was stationing within a couple degrees of her Pluto in the 11th house. And that like recognition from, organizations, I think would be very fitting for that. In March of 1950, Uranus entered her 12th house, which can have to do with things like hospitalization. So, what is interesting about this year is that I don't know the exact dates, but for a 9-month period out of 1950, she was actually hospitalized for 9 whole months. And during that time, she had several surgeries. Um, so, Uranus entering her 12th house really like shook things up in that she was forced to stay at the hospital for 9 months and have 7 surgeries, it looks like. Um, and then in 1952, she faces her Uranus opposition, and during that time, she's it kind of changes the way that she is able to work because she's forced to be bedridden. So let me just change the chart here. So she can only paint while lying in bed. Um, so I'll just move it forward a couple of years. So here it is approaching the opposition, and this was a year that it said, and you have Chiron there too with Uranus in the 6th, and she was forced to paint from bed at this time. So this is still part of her Uranus opposition story. Uranus had just stationed opposite her Uranus and conjunct her sun, and she had her first solo exhibit in Mexico in her entire life. But unfortunately, because she was bedridden, she wasn't supposed to go, according to the doctor. So she had them bring her bed with her in it to the exhibit so she could still be there, still socialize, drink with everybody. It really feels like a Uranus opposition, like she was determined to break free from the confines that they were placing on her. All right, so like I said, I'm going to end on a slightly more upbeat example of a person and their Uranus transits. So this is Michael Jordan, and I'm not going to spend a super long time on it because this video is also already super long. But so this was the summer, I don't know the exact date, but during the summer of 1980, he went to basketball camp, and then he got the attention of like college recruiters, and it led him down this path of playing professional basketball, first college basketball, then professional basketball. And as this was happening, Uranus was in this nice trine to his midheaven. So that's the real thing I wanted to point out here. This shows the date for when he left college after his junior year to join the Chicago Bulls. And Uranus was moving retrograde at this point, so it's actually applying to a conjunction with that moon in the 6th house. And that can be about change in career, but also that moon is his chart ruler, so it's like a real change in himself and his identity. And also, it's applying to a trine with his natal Mars in the 2nd house. So obviously, this is going to be like a big change and shakeup for him in terms of personal finances and his ability to earn money, as well as probably his self-worth and self-esteem, I would imagine. So lots of things going on there. And then it's also got this trine to his Pluto in the 3rd, and I feel like this was probably like a huge major life transition here. And you can see that in the transits. And you can still see it here with this transit from his first Olympic appearance, and how now that trine to the Mars in the second is like even more exact. And so this was stationing. So the Olympics ended, they started July 28th, but then they ended August 12th. And only days after that, on the 17th, that's when Uranus stations right there, conjunct his moon, and then proceeds to pass over again while direct. So big transit for him with his first Olympic appearance. This is a transit chart for his first marriage, and you can see Uranus entering his seventh house of relationships. He had already been engaged for a little while and had also already had his first child with his soon-to-be wife. And all of this is happening as Uranus is about to move into a seventh house, and then it moves into a seventh house, and he actually gets married. And then as Uranus is moving further through his seventh, and as it is conjunct his descendant, that's when he has a second kid. And then his third kid, it's still like within a 3-degree orb of his descendant at that point. So another thing that happened in Michael Jordan's life was that he briefly announced he was retiring, and then surprised everyone by deciding to play baseball instead in a minor league team. And he did a season, and then basically he just like made this announcement. He just said, I'm back. And that was like him announcing that he was going back to basketball. And that announcement coincides with this date. And you can see that he has Uranus like exactly conjunct his south node in the seventh house. So opposite his north node in the first house. And he's like, you know, letting go of this other identity he was trying on there for a bit, this other role he was trying, this other image he was trying, whatever keywords you want to use for the first. He's letting go of that and returning to what he's been known for. This shows the transit for when the movie that Michael Jordan was in, Space Jam, was released. And you can see that Uranus is applying to a conjunction with his Mercury in the eighth house. And then also Mercury rules his third house. And I was trying to figure out like how Space Jam connects to the third house. I mean, it definitely like you can see how like his first like major speaking role in a movie, how that would connect with Mercury. That makes sense. But then I was trying to figure out the third house. And then I was talking to some astrologer friends, and one of them mentioned cartoons being related to the third house. And I love that because if you think about like the third house being related to our early childhood memories and experiences, and like how we take in information as kids, and like what's better than like Saturday morning cartoons for that. And then I feel like that is all really brought in with this movie that he was in too. So I thought that was great all around. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to say about that. I just thought that was kind of a fun one. And that's another reason why I like ending on Michael Jordan, because some of these transits are just they're kind of adorable. Just a few more things that I want to talk about with Michael Jordan, and then I'll be done with this video. So this shows when he actually finally retired for real. Like there was like a few times where like looked like he was going to and then he didn't, or he did briefly, but then he came back and so on. But this is when he really did retire from basketball. And you could see he was going through his Uranus opposition there. So that's like perfect for like, deciding to make that big change and take your life in a different direction at that point. This shows when he got divorced. So this was when he got divorced from his first wife, and Uranus is there conjunct his natal Chiron. It's also squaring his chart ruler, the moon, in the sixth. But then also you can see that this wasn't an entirely negative experience for him, probably because it is also in a sextile to his descendant and in a trine to his ascendant. And so you'd imagine that in some way this was somehow beneficial to him in the long run. So this was when he got divorced, and next we'll look at when he got remarried. So here he gets remarried. 7 years later, he gets remarried, and Uranus is in this perfect trine with his chart ruler, the moon, and it's also squaring his ascendant and descendant, which makes sense for a major change in your relationship status, as well as you have Pluto there in the descendant too. So big changes in relationship status. And then the following year, as his twins are born, the aspects become even more exact. That Pluto at 13 degrees on his descendant, 13 degrees Capricorn, and then squaring Uranus at 13 degrees Aries. And so all of that's like very very precisely in play here. And then you even have Jupiter on his ascendant at the same time too. So there's a lot going on here as his twins are born. And the last thing I want to show for Michael Jordan, and then I'll be done with this video, is February 15th, 2023, in honor of his 60th birthday, he decided to donate $10 million to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which was the largest donation that they had ever received from an individual at that point. And you can see that Uranus in his 11th house, so, organizations and so on, is exactly opposite his Neptune in the 5th house. And Neptune, you could think about like charity and compassion and like thinking about others and viewing all of us as one and all of those like nice Neptunian things, right? And then you have it in the 5th house related to children, and Uranus opposite that is activating this way where he decides to give $10 million to a organization that is trying to help children. So I loved that. It's also a first house perfection year, and you've got Pluto on his south node, so opposite his north node in the first house. And um, yeah, it just, I love this as a like a transit to end on, because it's a really nice one. It's really like heartwarming and all of that. But then also I just love that like Uranus opposite Neptune in the 5th, and you have someone giving all this money to a charity that helps children. All right, so if you stuck with me, I am super impressed and proud of you, and thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long one, but it was really fun to make, and I learned a lot, so I hope that you guys did too. And I hope that you will keep watching as I hopefully complete more videos and get more regular about posting. And yeah, thank you so much for watching me. Please like the video and subscribe if you haven't, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future.